I'm Randy Schrum, an audit partner with Marshall Jones. In partnership with the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, I'd like to welcome Ashley Carson. She's a nonprofit and business banking professional at Atlanta Capital Bank. Ashley has a lot of great experience out there, and she's going to be sharing her wisdom and best practices. What we're going to do is ask a series of questions that many nonprofit members of the Georgia Center of Nonprofits are already asking, especially as they're considering any new banking relationships. So the first question has to do with our topic today of our series. First one is how banks assess a nonprofit's financial health. It might be a good place to start by asking, what exactly are the different types of relationships a nonprofit might have with their bank? In other words, what are some of the services you might provide to a nonprofit?
So thanks so much for having me, Randy. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the partnership we have with Marshall Jones, and I'm excited to do this for the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. When I talk about the services that banks are able to offer nonprofits, I think the easiest way to explain it is to kind of think of a tree. So when you think about the base of the tree, you really think about just the typical operating platform that any nonprofit needs to use in order to run their deposit accounts, have inflows and outflows
The day-to-day
of cash.
operations.
Exactly. Yeah. So the next part of the tree is, as you move into your nonprofit life cycle, is the lending. So you can go to a conventional bank for bridge financing against a capital campaign, a commercial mortgage, or working capital lines of credit. When you think of the branches, that's really the services and how they work together, which is a really important part of when you're picking a financial partner, how a bank and its different groups work together and provide you the services and the expertise that you need. And then really the overall umbrella of the tree, which is the most important thing in my perspective, is the relationship that you have with a bank.
Definitely.
So being able to have lots of people at the bank that you know, knowing when you reach out to them that they're always going to call you back, and when you have problems, you know you're going to have somebody that's going to be able to help you. But it's really basic when you just think about operating platform, treasury, deposits, lending opportunities, and then really how you're going to navigate your relationship with a banker.
Perfect. Ashley, when you sit down with a nonprofit for the first time, what are some of the things you're going to be looking for? In other words, what information from a potential client would they need to provide you in order for you to understand their needs?
Well, Randy, I would have to say that all good bankers, and particularly the ones that work with me, always do their homework before they meet with a nonprofit. And nonprofits should always be aware that usually the first place they go is the website. The website should really explain the mission. They're going to look into the leadership. Usually there's financials that are listed on the website, and we can also get access to a 990. So
that is best practice.
That's a best practice.
Yeah.
So when we're actually having that initial conversation with a nonprofit, the things that I really want to know about are the things that are between the lines. I want to hear the story of the nonprofit. I want to see the passion of the executive director. I want to understand what the mission is and who they're really serving, and if they're connected with those people that they're serving. I want to understand their relationships with the funding community. I want to understand who their board is and what the makeup of it is and how the nonprofit is governed. Bankers can always get access to the financial information, but it's the things that we don't read on the financial statements and in the 990 that we're really interested in learning about.
Well, what would those things be? Like telling their story a little bit more? Because
telling their story some more. Really, many of the nonprofits that I work with that are very successful actually have three things. They have a very clear mission, they have a really passionate executive director, and they have a dedicated board of directors that really lean into the organization and are able to provide a lot of support. From basic just learning about a nonprofit when we're meeting them, we'll typically get their analysis statements and their bank statements and provide them a pro forma. We'll look at their financial information, but it's really these other things that we're very interested in. It's the storytelling behind it all.
And I think many nonprofit members probably don't realize that their audited financial statements and the 990 can be a great place to tell their story, because it's their financial statements, their 990, and hopefully they can answer the questions before they're even asked. So that's a great example.
So let's talk about the audit for a second,
Yes.
because this is actually something that we really love. In fact, I have never met a credit partner that doesn't love reading through an audit. And it's actually something that we love to do as relationship managers as well. There is so much information that we can glean from the notes of an audit. It actually provides us with competitive information to understand if, how they operate, how they work with their existing banking relationship, what kind of debt they have, actually where it's priced. We can understand all of the different sources of revenue. Really great financials and audited financial statements are some of the most helpful tools that we can have.
That's great.
And really learning about how a nonprofit works and operates.
Very good. Yeah, thanks. Okay, Ashley, how about the role of the mission of a nonprofit? What does that play when you're assessing their financial health?
Sure. We touched on this just a little bit, and this is something that I really want to reiterate. So the mission is so critical. And this is it's not a financial metric. This is really about the story and the passion and what the nonprofit, who they're serving in the community. And so nonprofits, whenever they have a dialogue with a bank or with a funding community, being able to explain what their mission is clearly is so vitally important.
What does it mean for a nonprofit to become bankable? We hear that term all the time. How do they reach that level, and are there different requirements depending on what services a nonprofit is looking for from a bank?
Sure. Bankable is a pretty broad term, Randy, and so when I think about that, it really makes me think about the life cycle of a nonprofit. So banks work with nonprofits in all stages of a life cycle. When we have some clients that are just getting their tax IDs and are figuring out how they are starting. They're in the process of writing their mission and putting their organizational documents together. At that point in a life cycle, that's actually still a bankable nonprofit, because all nonprofits need to have a bank account and a means to understand and work the inflows and outflows of money in their, back and forth from their organization. As the life cycle kind of progresses with a nonprofit, you then start to look to lending opportunities and if they need to borrow money. And I have to say, there are actually a lot of nonprofits that never actually need to borrow money, which is a great thing.
That is a good thing.
So we love to work, we actually work with a number of nonprofits that only use us for our Treasury Services platform and work with us on their Treasury Service needs. But when they do get to the point of needing to borrow money, there are a couple of really important things to think about when you're working with a bank. The one thing about a bank is that conventional financing typically always looks at historical cash flow and what a company or nonprofit has done in the past, because that's always a good predicator of how they're going to act in the future. So when someone is bankable per se and able to lend money, we typically are looking for an organization that can produce at least 3 years of bank statements that actually show some kind of break-even profitability at the minimum. The next thing that we really need to understand is, what's our source of repayment? So it's really important that when someone goes to a bank and says, I want to borrow money, the next question a banker is always going to ask is, how is this going to be repaid? And lots of different loans, get repaid by different things, whether it's a pledge that's receivable, whether it's a capital campaign with a variety of pledges, whether we're going to be looking at the cash flow of the organization. And some organizations have earned revenue streams, others depend solely on fundraising dollars. And so really understanding those components are super important. The last thing I would say is that we're always also looking at collateral. And so when you're thinking about engaging with a bank and really thinking about being bankable to get a loan, you think about, what's my source of repayment to the bank? How am I going to explain that? And what kind of collateral is the bank going to take? Well, collateral itself can also come in lots of different forms. So collateral could be a nonprofit wants to move into a new building, and the bank would actually look at the loan to value of the building itself. Other times we'll look at a pledge that's coming from a foundation. And perhaps it's a pledge where it's a reimbursable grant. And so the nonprofit actually has to perform services and then get reimbursed by the foundation, which leaves a cash flow gap. And we can usually accommodate that with like a working capital line of credit.
Makes sense.
And then other times it's a capital campaign. So we're looking at a variety of pledges that are getting collected over, a 3 to 5 year period and aligning our financing to support the collection of those pledges as the organization collects cash.
That makes sense. Thank you.